Good morning all. I'd like to call the meeting of the Morrison County Board of Commissioners to order. Please stand if you can for the pledge. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of the county board minutes.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Let's see here, addition or deletions to the agenda this morning.
There is none.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, I don't see Helen here yet. We can go to our sheriff, I believe. Morning, Tom.
Morning. Morning.
Morning, Sheriff.
Morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. How are you guys?
Good.
Good, thank you.
I was here earlier at a planning session, so this is just a follow-up. Basically, just looking for permission to fill the vacancy of our jail administrator, Mike Monier slot. Lieutenant Monier put in his letter of resignation. His last day of employment will be March 27th. So I am just looking for permission from the board to be able to post this and move forward and try and fill this vacancy of this important position.
And Mr. Chair, we've discussed this, we've said all these things, that it's very important. I make a motion.
I'll second that motion.
I have a motion and a second on the floor. Further discussion.
Sheriff, can you answer, how long has Mike been the jail administrator? How long has he been employed with the county?
Just looking at his letter of resignation, he pointed out that he's been employed 30-plus years.
30 plus.
And you got about 6 weeks before he leaves, so.
Correct, yeah, I wanted to come to the
Yep.
board as early as possible because I know how important this position is. I want to make sure that there's a smooth transition.
Yep.
Sheriff, will you replace that position with the same rank? Would that be your plan?
Correct, that's my plan moving forward.
Further discussion? Questions now. Mike retires and we're going to advertise that inside and internal and external, or just internal, or is there a requirement to advertise both on?
There's no requirement either way. However, I listen to advice and opinions of the board. I plan on my next step is just meeting with my administration team and discussing that and then proceeding forward from there.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, there's nothing that says you can't internally try first, and then if you don't get a qualified candidate, go external. So it isn't as if one decision or another would preclude the second from happening. So certainly, it takes a while to replace positions. It's always nice when you have this much advance notice. Typically, you don't. 2 weeks sometimes is all you get. So there's a little bit of time, but it still takes longer than 6 weeks sometimes. So we'll work together and make sure we get qualified candidate, whether internal or external, but make sure we take some time and
Correct.
have the right fit. So.
And Mr. Chair, I don't mean to put words in Commissioner Wincher's mouth, but I'm to assume that with that motion would include if we hired somebody internally that then you would backfill? That's just an
Correct.
automatic type of a deal?
Yes, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
we should have clarified that right away, but that would be the request, that staffing levels as they are, which we've discussed at this table before in terms of,
Yep.
we have minimum requirements for the DOC for the number of inmates that we have, and right now we're at a point where reducing that isn't an option. It's been reduced from where it was when we had higher inmate counts. So yes, thank you. That would be the assumption that we would then be able to backfill if for some reason an internal candidate was chosen.
And members of the board, what I'd like to do too is thank Mike for all of his years of service, and we'll do that personally when I meet with him. So I'm sure we're going to have a gathering or something. We'll see how that goes. So, okay.
No, I would appreciate that. I'm sure he would appreciate that as well, so.
Absolutely. And his final day again was when?
March 27th.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's only 6 weeks from now.
Okay, we have a motion and a second by the board. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.
Have a good day, Sean.
Thank you, Sheriff. Have a good day.
Yeah, Helen. And we have Helen McLennan here from Soil and Water.
Just barely made it. It's icy
Morning,
outside.
Helen.
Just in an hour, my truck was totally coated with ice, so I had to put on my little cheaters on
There
my
you go.
shoes. Thank you for seeing me this morning, commissioners and everyone. I'm here this morning to ask you to pass 2 resolutions. One is a project for clean water funding, clean water partnership funding. Commissioner Wincher brought a project to our attention that is under County Road 26 in the city of Royalton, and the Platte River is undermining the bank, and which could eventually pose a threat to that bridge, as well as it's washing out a great deal of shoreline for a private landowner named George Lancaster. And Mr. Lancaster has requested assistance for a while. He's really lost a lot of riverbank, and oddly, he's very willing to put in. Any grant application requires a 25% match. And so last week, Commissioner Wincher and Steve Bukowski and our engineer met to talk about what it was going to cost and to enter a partnership. But the partnership in this case certainly meets the Clean Water Partnership. It'd be a partnership between the City of Royalton, Morrison County, and Morrison County Public Works, as well as a private landowner. So the City of Royalton was sent the same resolution that I think Deb probably prepared for you this morning, but it does need to be approved by resolution by the county board to submit for the funds. I brought you a copy of the design and the cost estimate. The engineer is estimating it to be just shy of $58,000. We would add another 20% on that for project development, the engineering design. We do need to try to contribute to the WCTSA entity, which is where our engineer team is located out of St. Cloud. But we have a right to charge for those services. It's not all free. He has had this preliminary plan approved by Steve Bukowski, so the two engineers will work together, and Steve has committed some of the match from his public works budget, and then the remainder of the matching funds would come from the private landowner. So we are requesting that we request a grant application for $53,700, and then the 25 for a total cost of, I think it's $71,600, and then we would match that with county public works and private landowner funding.
Members of the board, any questions about that?
Mr. Chair,
Zelinski?
I've got a couple of things. Number one, without looking like a rockhead, is this on 26 right in town?
It's right on the very edge, the very eastern edge of
On the eastern
Royalton.
edge of Royalton, okay.
And under bridge, I believe Steve told me I have it on the grant application, 7354.
The bridge number?
The
Yeah,
bridge
which
number.
That's what I
Out
didn't
by the
mean
school.
anything to
Right.
Right by the school?
No,
by the school,
Just
okay.
before the school?
No,
No, it's actually,
it's not
it's
that.
actually
No,
east of,
that's-
yeah,
it's, what is it, 29, I think it is?
I think so.
County Road 29. That's the one that goes out
Oh, I
toward.
said 26, I'm sorry.
No, I think I said
South.
26.
To the south past the
It's
school?
going, no, it doesn't go past the school at all. It's heading north out of Royalton.
Oh, north.
There's another bridge.
Yeah.
You go past,
Oh.
It's kind of a rapids that
I
goes
call
through
it
there?
The
I call
Legion
it
kind of.
Carnes's Bridge.
Over there.
That was what it was called
Okay.
back when I was a kid. So.
All right.
The project will require, as you see by the design, quite a bit of rock armoring and some river barbs, which we have proven really, truly work. The DNR always wants to see some type of bioengineering included. So on the Lancaster property and by the river barbs, we would place cedar vetments. We did that on another stretch of the Platte River, and that has really held well, and those cedar trees are still in place. That adds a lot of fish habitat. And then on Lancaster property itself, we would use what's called root wattles or root wads that's more of a bioengineering project. It kind of builds a shelf with vegetation, or it's actually just sticks and limbs and woody vegetation, and then you put some willow stakings right through those root wads into the bank, and it will repair itself and allow for fish habitat, and it's a more fish-friendly wildlife habitat type design.
Mr.
Other
Chair?
questions? Yes.
Helen, just one more question. The purpose of the county passing a resolution is not a funding mechanism on the county's behalf. It's just part of the game that needs to be played for grant application, is that correct?
Clean Water Partnership funds must be generated by the county approving. In the grant application, you're approving me to apply
That's-
on your behalf.
Yep.
But, and I don't know how Steve's budget is overseen by you, but I'm assuming he has some latitude on where and what. But because it does eventually threaten the safety of that bridge and road,
Yep.
he's all for the project.
Other questions from the board? That being said, Helen, how much, and I didn't review this, okay, how much is the landowner responsible for?
Well, we're responsible for 25% of the match, which
Right.
comes to 17,900. He has verbally committed to spending up to 20,000, but that portion that is on public road right-of-way and the bridge reinforcement, Steve is committing to the Public Works Department. So how much it'll eventually actually cost the landowner is probably under 5,000.
Okay.
Maybe a little more.
And
but
is there a
he's
way for
turf-
him to recoup that dollars through anything, through the Lessard, anything like that?
Under any grant, we're expected to match it by 25%. That can be somewhat in kind. If he can or wanted to do a certain portion of the labor himself, or perhaps drive in those willow stakings or that portion of vegetative, he could defray his actual out-of-pocket
Okay.
expenses. But he's becoming very concerned as just how far into his yard this is going to get, so. And, you know, just as another matter, we did not receive a single nickel under clean water funds for the second year in a row. And Representative Creasha did organize a call-in last week with myself and the land manager for Bowser, and I whined and threw quite a fit over that. But, you know, we've received funding 50% of the 6 years it's been available, and he pointed that out, that we're not lacking in having received funds, but for the Jane Veriano situation, as you all know about that one, there will be no state funding towards her project except what I have set aside for her. So I'm also going to be back in front of you in a couple of weeks to apply for LCCMR funds, and hopefully
LCCRM?
that's Legislative
What's that stand
Commission. Legislative Commission,
That's fine.
whatever, you know, it's gambling funds is the source of it. And we might have a strong case. I want to make that one for the Platte River watershed as well, but also the Mississippi River, to try to get some additional funds for these kinds of projects. It's not unusual for a landowner to think, well, this is a public water, therefore you should pay for it 100%. But there is no grant fund that will pay 100% of a project. We're expected to match it 25%, but a portion of that 25% can be in kind.
And
So-
Mr. Chair, Helen, what happens if that landowner does not want to kick in any money? And they expect, will you still apply for these grants, or?
Well, I'm still gonna apply for the grants, but we would probably shorten the project and not do the repair on his property.
Okay.
We would still, as you were there,
Right, yep.
Steve describes it as being quite a stretch there, which would serve Mr. Lancaster, that it would reduce the damage as it goes forward, but it wouldn't repair the damage
Right.
he's received. We have never come across a case where the landowner didn't pony up. He requested the
Right,
funding,
yeah.
or, you know, he requested our assistance.
Well, my point is, Helen and Mr. Chair, is that it helps if the landowner is willing to kick in.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely. But the showing, the evidence of partnership, which is one reason the resolutions are important, it's showing that the city of Royalton and the county of Morrison is cooperating to try to secure funding for this particular project. This is an impaired stretch of the Platte River, so it should score fairly well.
Okay. Commissioner Wilson?
Helen, just because I don't know that much about this, when land is taken away from erosion, do you replace the land? Or do they put dirt back out there, or are you just doing the rocks now?
Once in a while, but then it requires a lot more permitting. You have to get grade and fill permits from the county as well as DNR if you're working out into the water. This project will require a DNR permit as well as an Army Corps permit. And I haven't looked and talked to Amy yet, but it could possibly require a grade and fill. It'll certainly require a riprap permit if nothing else, but it'll probably require permitting authority from Planning and Zoning, DNR, and Army Corps. Only in one instance, up on the Long Prairie River a number of years ago, we did build back what had been lost and then armored it. But that's somewhat rare that you do that. You're typically going to try to divert the water back into the main channel, and then river barbs and armoring is an acceptable practice to do that.
And Helen, members of the board, up on the Long Prairie River, you're talking in Motley, okay?
Yes.
And that's because that was undercutting the highway, the
Right.
Highway 10, so that had to be repaired because it was continuing to work its way under the highway basically, and that's why they needed to do that, I believe.
On that particular project, right in Motley, the one that we did 2 years ago, that did not require filling back into the
okay,
bank.
okay.
We armored the way it was, but, oh, well, I'm sorry, you're right. We did, for that portion that was adjacent to the highway, we did have to fill some back in. But I was talking more of a project just immediately south of that, back when that property belonged to an old fellow by the name of Rex Pearson. It was just really cutting in, and we actually did, with permits, build back a shelf and then armored it. And, but that's the only time I can remember that we actually tried to restore a bank back to what it was. Because rivers are forever changing, and it's the natural flow and evolution of a river.
Another curious question
Go
I
ahead.
have is setbacks. You know, a lot of these setbacks are, you know, you're, especially along lake shore and stuff like that, it's by the foot. Does that, where his land used to be, does that count as a setback, or do you take the
Well, that'd be
new
interesting.
setback?
If he were to build a structure, would you look at it for
What do
what
you
it is
use?
now
Yeah,
versus
where'd
what
it
it
go
once
from?
was? I don't know, that's a question for planning and zoning, but again, rivers are forever changing course, so the setback is from the ordinary high. So if the ordinary high is still a ways, even though you've lost all this land, it possibly is the footage from that ordinary high. But
I'm just learning.
ordinary highs can change as well, so.
I guess I'm gonna share a concern now. My concern is that we have so many people south of us who are using the water out of the Mississippi for their drinking water. And my concern is that when are they gonna begin paying more and look at the necessity to really keep these rivers clean and repaired? And that, I mean, at some point, it's gonna have to happen because there's only so much water. And my hope is that more money will be put outstate to really keep these rivers. Being a member of the Headwaters Board, we're really looking at some of that, bringing more money up here to preserve, you know, areas that keep the watershed clean.
I think most of the clean water funds from St. Cloud North have been protection dollars, and a certain amount of it. What's frustrating to me personally is that I sat on the Clean Water Legacy team on how that money should be spent. I was the only LGU represented on a team of 25. We met every Wednesday for 6 months. And the focus and the direction to the state legislature was that money should be geared primarily towards implementation, ground-ready projects, and that's what I've given them for 2 years. We're not talking about taking a lot off for administrative or technical assistance, but we had the Veriano and all of these different projects that were ground-ready projects, and yet Benton and Crow Wing, and I don't begrudge them, yay for them, but they got money for outreach and civic engagement and finding projects that will enhance and protect a watershed. And my thought is, are you looking at these very carefully? Because you said, and we said, that that should be ground-ready projects. I think by throwing a fit and getting our state legislators involved, I look for next year's to get some money. But, you know, because Ron and Paul serve on several committees, that they can be of great influence. And the very fact that he immediately got involved in it and organized that call, I think they're going to be hard pressed to ignore us a third year. But it's frustrating for me because then I have to go back to the Jane Verianos and keep trying to find her funding and also be the bad informant that, I'm sorry, we didn't get anything for you. But in this case, I've already run this project by MPCA, and Phil Vertruba, our project manager out of Brainerd, likes the project. And MPCA applications are a little cleaner and a little easier to define, and so I'm optimistic that we can get this, particularly when it threatens a bridge, it threatens public safety, and it's an impaired water.
We have a motion and a second? No, we need a motion and a second, I believe.
I would move on that, Mr.
I'll
Chair.
second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion
Thank you.
passes.
The second resolution that Deb put before you is to the county water plan, even though our office administers, is a county plan. It's time for the 5-year update, and so by resolution, you need to notify the state that you intend to go forward with an update. From your resolution, I send that to the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and I send it to all of our neighboring counties with the notification that we are collecting and asking for data. We will publish it in the paper, asking for citizen input on what they feel is important and targeted projects or areas that they feel should be included. Then from that, we will also incorporate a lot of new plans that have come about in the last 5 years. The Mississippi Headwaters Plan, the Long Prairie River TMDL is in its almost final form, it's in draft form. The Rum River Watershed Plan is completed, and the Crow Wing River Plan is completed. And you have completed your AIS, or aquatic invasive species. So all of those new plans will be new chapters in our water plan. And then from that, we don't have to do the whole enchilada that we did 5 years ago. It's an update, so we don't have to do a scoping document, but we do need to work with all of the cities and everyone involved on what their concerns are. And then we'll go through the plan and see, 5 years ago, we projected we needed to do this, this, and this. Where are we with that? And then there's ongoing objectives that will always remain. You don't stop wanting to protect rivers and lakes and water quality and groundwater. So our initiative to continue with irrigation management will stay in there. There's a lot that will stay, but some of those things like the geological atlas, that's Phase 1 is done, Phase 2 should be here in another year, so some of those things we have actually finished and completed.
Members of the board, we have a request for a resolution to update the water plan. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Further discussion?
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
I
Commissioner
think
Jones.
that part of the reason that past county boards have supported this comprehensive water management plan that we have, and that our current county board obviously supports it, is the theory behind it that there's only so much water. And if it doesn't start somewhere to maintain clean water, whether it's actually physically starting here in Morrison County or not is not the issue. But if it doesn't start somewhere, it's never going to end. And I absolutely support this.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's a state mandate that you have a local water plan, but it also, every single grant application, including the Clean Water Partnership, you have to reference the page, the objective, and the goal of your water plan to even qualify for funding. So that water plan does need to be fairly specific, and fortunately for us, it includes the Platte River, and it includes all of those areas that we know to be impaired and of concern.
Sure. Other questions, other feedback? And Helen, the unique thing about this is, like Commissioner Jelinski said, we have the Mississippi that runs through here, but it doesn't start here. But we have numerous little watersheds that begin here, Little Rock, for instance, that are in this county and begin here, that if we don't protect them, somewhere down the line, someone's not going to have the clean water that they need and for everything. So,
Benton County was successful again in receiving another $175,000 of clean water funds for the Little Rock. And I always think, I make him look really good, because we spent every cent of his money in Morrison County. Yay for our team, or our landowners are getting that funding, but he gets to report it, and it looks like Benton County's accomplishment, even though Morrison County has spent their entire the last 3 grants.
So that can be used up in Morrison County to protect the watershed.
Absolutely.
Which is.
It's all
great.
used in Morrison.
Okay.
They never can find a project.
Yeah.
But oddly enough, and
all
I'm
right.
happy to say, the Little Rock Creek has dramatically repaired. The oxygen is where it should be, the temperatures are where it should be, and they're finding natural reproduction of brown trout again.
Brook trout probably?
Brown is what the DNR fishery
Really?
said. So that stretch that is in Morrison County, which is the Little Rock Creek and its tributaries, has dramatically improved. Oddly and tragically, it hasn't improved the lake one iota. That lake is impaired, it's gonna, their own study shows it can't reach an acceptable standard. It's an artificial lake. But the creek itself, which is a trout stream, has dramatically improved. And I think that's because of our landowners and the projects we've done.
Anything else from the board? We have a motion, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Helen.
Have a good day, Helen.
Before you would sign it.
Stay on the road.
Thanks.
Brad Vold and Karen.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners.
Good morning.
We are here to give an update on our energy assistance program, and we're in a little different position this year than we were last year at this time. You might remember that propane was about $4.50 a gallon, and there was an emergency declaration around propane. So what winters will do,
What a difference, huh?
what a difference a winter makes, but.
Look outside.
Here we go.
Okay, primary heat. Service provider payments by county. We have Benton, Morrison, Sherburne, and Stearns. And it shows how many households received primary heat and the dollar amounts. Benton County's population is real close to Morrison, but Morrison still used more in primary heat. Sherburne County, of course, they're quite large, so they used
And
primary
if I already
heat.
made it, do we have a reason why Morrison County uses more than Benton?
Probably because they have less income in Morrison County.
Okay.
Benton County has more places to work, more jobs.
And then, Mr. Chair, that would also then show where Sherburne County,
Correct.
more metro-y, if you will. Okay,
Yep.
Yep.
okay, very good.
Chair, if I
Yes,
could, Karen,
Deb?
could you step back just a little bit and explain how people access this? They're, through the eligibility team, they come and they have questions about this, or are you gonna get there maybe?
Well, we don't do the energy program in Morrison County. The TRICAP in St. Cloud actually does the program. Morrison County gave that up quite a few years ago. But they do come in, they have questions. We do have the applications available. They can drop them off at the desk, or fax them, or mail them to TRICAP in St. Cloud. Clients do have a lot of questions on the program. We basically refer them to TRICAP.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well, good to know.
And, Mr. Chair, if
Yes,
I may.
Commissioner Winchell.
TRICAB, now I've, over the years, don't they do like windows and insulation?
They
Is this
do.
part of this project, I'm assuming? Yes, no?
TRICAP in St. Cloud does basically the energy program. We have a TRICAP in Little Falls that
Right.
does the weatherization program.
And that's something that, again, you'll be
Yep.
getting how a person contacts, like Deb said.
Yep, if they're interested in weatherization, they'd contact TCC. If they're interested in energy programs,
Okay.
then they would contact TRICAP in St. Cloud, or Sauk Rapids, so,
It's a good program.
yeah.
Mr. Chair, Brad, primary heat, I mean, I'm sure it's natural gas, so forth. What about wood? Is that?
Wood, if it's your primary heat, they do cover
They
wood.
do cover wood and stuff too.
Anything that's primary. If you have wood and fuel, but your primary wood, they would do the primary. Yep, they have vendors that they deal with the wood.
Do you ever make it where they need to be efficient? I mean, let's just say wood is so much more expensive or whatever, that they need to switch over to something, or that's not an option, or?
If their furnace is very old, what TRICAP does is they'll make recommendations that the furnace be replaced, and that's where the energy-related repair program comes in. They'll make, like if the furnace is old and it's using way too much wood, they'll put them on the energy-related repair on the waiting list, if there is a waiting list. The reason we know all this is we used to do the
Yeah.
energy program, so.
Right.
yeah.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Okay. Crisis. Crisis is a program that's available through Energy Assistance. If you've used all of your primary heat, but you still are in need of heating costs before the end of the season, you can use up to $500 of crisis. Or say your fan on your furnace goes out. Usually, if the energy-related repair money is all gone, they'll dip into the crisis for that. They like to leave the crisis for heating and use the energy-related repair program to fix furnaces. But you can get up to $500 in addition to your primary heat grant, which is a lot. And you-
Mr. Chair, maybe last year was a little bit more prevalent in terms
Right.
of the need for the crisis funding because of the heating fuel
They
costs.
actually had extra crisis funds last year. They had an additional $500 you could receive because of the high costs. And it shows in Benton County, again, Morrison didn't use as much as Benton, so Sherburne and Stearns. Stearns is quite heavily populated, so. And then we go to the energy-related repair program. Now that is for replacing furnaces, for fixing furnaces. So if someone calls and they're elderly and they say their furnace isn't working, they'll send someone out. They'll check furnace, they'll check the age. If it's old, they'll replace it. If they have fuel oil and they feel gas would be better, they'll replace it with gas, whatever's more cost effective. It's a good program for the elderly and the disabled.
And Mr. Chair, Karen, it's all income qualifying.
It
You
is.
need to go through application
And I do
process.
have some of the income guidelines, like a household of one, the annual income can be $23,354. Household of two, $30,540. Household of three, $37,726. It's 50% of the state medium income to qualify.
And again, Mr. Chair, Karen, when these energy efficient, now you can also be a renter and then the landowner would qualify for
No.
some of this? No?
No.
Even for the
No.
furnace or the, none of that, okay,
No, if it's a rental unit,
yep,
no. Energy assistance does not replace rentals.
okay.
No, you have to be the homeowner.
At one time, did they used to do that?
No.
Not through this program anyway,
Right,
Mr. Chair. I
okay.
don't know if there were
Yeah.
other programs that
Yeah.
maybe
Okay.
they worked through.
Mr. Chair,
Yes?
I just think it's interesting that the public knows, like, for primary heat, we had 1,045 use it in Morrison County, correct? The crisis, we had 105 people use it, and the ERR,
Energy-related repairs.
okay, we had 30 people use it in Morrison County. So that's kind of interesting out of the population of 32,000.
The energy-related repair can be costly, like a new furnace. Sometimes they have to do the ductwork. You know, it can get
No, if
pretty
they're gonna
costly.
convert from oil to gas.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but in the long run, you're still saving money, especially like if they do it in town here where the gas is piped in. You're saving money.
Could you email me what that qualification one is, what people have to have, so I can have
Income?
that on record?
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah, because a lot of people ask questions about these things, and that's what I've got to learn a little more on. How do they qualify, what do they do, or the world thinks everybody's on it, so
Yeah.
it'd be nice to know how you qualify.
And Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Jolinski.
what we just learned, the world isn't
Right.
taking advantage of this.
Right,
Correct.
right.
I mean, there obviously are people in this county and other counties that are, but those numbers are not probably as great as we might think.
People think.
And this is another tool, especially for as you get older, for some of those elderly populations to help maintain them in their own home.
Right.
And again, so not that we have an age breakdown,
Yes.
but I'm gonna guess a number of these households are elderly who are trying to stay in their own home, and, so it is another tool that's available for them.
Well, it helps the cost on the
Yeah.
other side of things.
Yeah.
you know.
Oh, very much.
Yeah.
Great project.
Mr.
And
Chair,
Yes.
to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, what's so interesting is everybody concentrates so much on these types of programs. Karen will come in and talk about the food programs and things of that nature and stuff, and everybody thinks they're on it. But when you look at, $27,000 or whatnot spent within the county and then compare it to the millions upon millions spent for healthcare. This is such a
Exactly.
small issue, and, small issue but big issue, in terms of what people are thinking. So, yeah, concentrating on what really costs money for the state of Minnesota, for the county of Morrison is it's about healthcare.
And I would just like to note that Lori, who runs the Energy Assistance Program at TRICAP, said there is still funds available, and they're looking at doing some more outreach activities this year in Morrison County. So,
What?
some more outreach activities during this calendar year, like maybe come to the county fair,
Okay, I was
have a
gonna say,
booth,
what
those
does that
kinds of.
mean?
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
know you're looking for something, but are we looking to spend it, or are we looking for people that need it?
So they still have money available, and they still had actually an added allocation again this year, similar to what last year. I don't think it was as significant, but there are funds available still if people are struggling with meeting their home heating costs. So, so it is a good program for those that can use it. So,
All right.
any other questions on this?
Crisis can also be used for like an electric shut-off.
Oh,
If they heat, if the electricity runs their furnace, they can use crisis for electric shut-off. So,
I know what electric shut-off, but what is electric shut-off? What is that? 'Cause I have it
disconnect notice?
Right.
Yep.
So if they're behind in their electric,
Oh, no.
Yep.
so
I thought it was the efficient, because my furnace will shut down during
Oh.
the night.
Oh.
That's totally.
the off
No.
peak,
No,
Yeah.
It would be like.
they'd be paying a lot if they had to pay every the off peak went up.
As long as
I would say all heating systems take electricity, even wood. They gotta have the
If they have
fans
a
and
blower,
stuff.
yeah.
Right.
You'd have to have, yeah.
But there are other resources if their primary heat is not
The
electric.
old wood stove.
There's other resources if they're gonna get an electric disconnect, so.
Yeah. Okay.
Very good.
Thank you,
Karen.
Karen.
thank you very kindly.
Brad, next.
The second item I have is a request to use fund balance to place 2 workstations in a conference room for social workers. We have no more offices, and so we're looking at retrofitting a current conference room into 2 workstations. So we will move case aids into those workstations, and then there will be 2 offices available for social workers. In 2014, we ended up putting a little over 500,000 into fund reserve, into our reserve balance, because of our, both in terms of our increased revenue and decreased expenses, so. So the request is to use a fund balance to create 2 workstations in a conference room.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, this is one of those expenses that we typically don't budget for on an annual basis because it becomes, comes up intermittently when the needs are rising, so fund balance is typically a resource for that specific expense.
I have a request for proposal to provide $9,500 out of fund balance to remodel or put a couple workstations in social services. Further questions from the board? Mike, Commissioner West's proposal?
In our discussion, that was gonna be moving our panels that we could use if
Correct.
if we're gonna be doing some stuff in the courthouse.
Yep.
Those are panels that we can move into some other area, so it's not money that's
Correct.
into construction
Yep.
that's not gonna be used
Yep.
later if we decide to move something around, because that was in our
Yeah,
planning
the only,
discussion.
the only changes to this conference room, we'll have to run some electric wire to power the panels, and we'll have to run some cables for computers, otherwise no walls will be moved at this point, so.
Further discussion? Commissioner Jelinski?
Mr. Chair, Brad, for everybody's sake, we don't have any more room. And I just heard you say that, and it's a very interesting piece of statement that you just made. We don't have any more room. And I don't mean to sound out of line, but why don't we have any more room? Perhaps you could explain just a little tiny bit as to what drove us to where we are today.
I certainly can,
I mean,
Commissioner
I'm not
Johnson.
asking for an hour or anything, but briefly, what drove us to where we are that all of a sudden we don't have any more room? It's a fair question.
I think where we are today, there's been a couple of dramatic changes in the services that we provide. If you look at the Affordable Care Act and the increased medical assistance population that we have encumbered as a result of the Affordable Care Act, that's required us to hire some financial workers to manage that. If you look at our cost savings around out-of-home placements, the board has been very supportive of us hiring social workers to reduce our out-of-home placement costs, and that's been very efficient. So that's added some staff. And then as you'll hear in the next presentation around around Minnesota Choices and the change from a long-term care consultation process to a Minnesota Choice assessment, that's created more, required more staff time, which requires more staff. So those are probably three of the big things that have changed over the last couple of years.
So, Mr. Chair, Brad, what I'm hearing you say is, we're not just hiring 2 more people in social services to say, we've got 2 more people in social services. This is driven by the legislature, if you will, from Washington to St. Paul to here, in order to do the job that's being done.
That would be a fair kind of wrap-up of what I just said. Thank you.
What I wanted. With that statement, I would make the motion.
I have a motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second on the floor, further discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes?
the reason we haven't been to this table asking for this specifically before, with the changes that we've had, is we've done some things internally. There was a big room, a space that was filled with paper files. That isn't there any longer because we've gone electronic. So we've been able to take that space for some of these other changes that have occurred the last number of years and utilize it for office space. We've taken some other changes and implemented some things in which we've moved some folks around. So we've been doing things, and well, I guess some of the remodel you were aware of, but normally, again, some of these these ongoing costs are budgeted, that you don't see all of this. It's a fund balance transfer, that's why it's at the table in front of you.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Brad,
Commissioner
you have
Johnson.
still have a couple conference rooms that you'll
Yep,
have to use.
oh, yes, yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Further discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
The next thing I have on my agenda is a request to hire a social worker co-located at the clinic in Little Falls as a result of the State Innovation Model Grant that the hospital and clinic received. And I'd just like to thank Rhonda and Lee for coming to our planning meeting, having a longer term discussion about what this meant, what this looked like. So
And Rhonda and Lee are who, so that,
Rhonda Buccalo is the nursing clinic manager and Lee Boyles is the president of St. Gabriel's Hospital.
very
So,
good, thank you, Brad.
and so they received a $280,000 grant over a 2-year period to try and impact the use of prescription drugs, initially in the elderly population. And then they will move down move down in age in terms of the prescription drugs. This person would be one member of a 2-person team they have hired. I think she did say hired an RN case manager when they were here last time. So this person would be a member of that team, working with physicians, clients, on trying to reduce the prescription drug use. And our agency, along with public health, are a member of the leadership team around this SIM grant. I did bring that leadership circle that they had at our planning meeting last time. They are asking to contract with us for half of that position, so half of this position would be paid for by the hospital over this 2-year period, and then the other half would be to help us backfill some of those min-choice assessments that we're going to be doing, as well as we're going to be moving forward on having to do reassessments sometime this summer in min-choices, which also would take a little bit more time. We're also seeing more of a increase in assessments as well. So the request then is to hire this position. They would be co-located at the hospital
Mr. Chair, they'd
Yes,
be at the
Commissioner
hospital
Johnson.
all the time.
most of the time. They would
Okay.
still have some space here to come back.
Okay.
Part of the reason they wanted us too is to provide that social work support.
Okay.
Have the resources of our supervisors and other social workers to help manage the population.
Sure.
So, but the goal is to have them there as much as we can.
Commissioner Wilson?
Brad, so the grant money, the 280,000, the hospital keeps all that. And that's where
Correct.
they run their piece. The piece that we're putting in there halftime, that's coming out of what money?
That is gonna come out of their $280,000 grant.
That's
So,
coming out of their grant
yes.
also?
yes,
Mr. Chair, I think you misunderstood that. The portion that's going to be employed by Morrison County, so
Right.
Oh, yeah.
our
Right.
portion is funded by,
so 40,000 will come from the grant, which is half of the position, and then the other half would come through Min Choices revenue, which is state and federal funds.
Okay, and let me see, we would have those funds anyway? I mean, we need to hire somebody to help administer that anyway, right?
Correct.
Otherwise, we'd be doing the whole thing ourselves.
In Min Choices, it's been kind of a gradual procession into staff time in terms of how long it's been taken. Currently, we've added one FTE to do Min Choices. And this would then allow us to have 1.5 FTEs to do min choices. So it's been a gradual progression. We at some point would need to hire for min choices just because of the additional reassessments into that service. So,
Mr. Chair, the work is ramping up, and
Yes.
so what we're doing solely is ramping up staff to be able to respond to that work. And we get paid through the state and federal dollars for the time spent doing that. So as the work ramps up, the funding is ramping up in conjunction with that to
Maybe you
support.
could explain to me Mincher choices?
nope.
Min
And,
choice.
Min choices.
yep, Minnesota Choices
What-
is
what
different
is
than MinSure. I'm just
Okay.
gonna say MinSure is the healthcare exchange, which is under medical assistance. And then Minnesota Choices is a new assessment that we are required to do now for disability and elderly individuals looking for services through the waivers.
Okay.
So Minnesota Choices now replaces the long-term care consultation we used to do, the personal care assistant assessments we used to do, the elderly waiver assessments that used to be done. So what they have done along with is put all of our assessments that we do to manage the elderly and disabled population into Minnesota Choices assessments. So it's a unified assessment tool for all populations.
I just need explanations
Yep.
on some of these, because
Yep.
you bring that up
Great
and everybody,
question.
most
Yep.
people don't know what you're
Yep.
talking about.
Yep.
So
Right.
that's,
Did you get an answer, you understand?
yeah, not,
And Mr. Chair, if I
Commissioner
may,
Zelinski.
this is all, again, we just got done having the conversation, driven by the legislature. That's
Yep.
just the way it is.
And again, I think this position, I said this last at our planning meeting and before, you know, it's an exciting opportunity to partner with St. Gabriel's Hospital, having social workers there, to develop that relationship. They're a big referral for Minnesota Choices and other things around the mental health system. And so I think anything we can do to partner with them. And as I also said at our planning meeting, you know, healthcare is evolving to more community-based healthcare as well. It's not just happening in the clinic anymore. They're trying to do some things to support physicians in the care they provide their patients. And this is just another means by which to do that. Trying to reduce people going to the emergency rooms. So it's trying to divert some of those healthcare costs to cheaper alternatives that hopefully will better meet their needs.
And Mr. Chair, we discussed this too, but if someone comes here, we're not gonna send them over.
Correct. Yep.
Yes.
And the goal would be to, you know, if the hospital might have somebody, they could see them there, but no, if they come here, they'll be served here. So,
And the portion, our portion is Men's Choice will take care of their benefits, that's what
Yes,
it's all.
yep.
So
Yep.
it's for 2 years.
for 2 years, yep.
Commissioner Wilson?
another question, when you said funding, state funding and federal funding for this program. If I'm not mistaken, I asked you before that the money that comes from the state and federal goes to the people, but Morrison County pays for administrating these programs?
This,
So this one's different then?
this one is a little bit different. This provides resources to pay for the employees to do the work.
Okay.
But this helps residents access waiver funds, which will help maintain them in their home, provide supports to them. It might be providing some home health care or home health aid or a nurse coming in to check on their medications, those kinds of things. So waiver funds basically it's a pass-through, but these particular funds pay for the staff time to do those activities.
Deb?
Mr. Chair, some programs get
Yes.
funded for staff time, some programs just fund client services. So this is one that funds both, really. They pay us to do the assessments to figure out where clients are sitting in terms of accessing additional funding that comes from the state. So it's a little both in some regards.
Yeah.
We have a request for a position, further discussion, or do I have a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion on the floor, second?
Second.
Further discussion? Brad and members of the board, I think it's so important that the networking that will hopefully come about as a result of this. I mean, working with the hospital, I think the more we can work with them to really have more impact put into programs and what isn't or what is underserved and where we can start to fill some of those gaps is just really a big plus to this, so.
Yep.
So that being said. Have a motion and a second, further discussion, gentlemen? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. As Katie comes up, we're gonna do the delegation, but I just said, one thing I didn't put on the agenda, but I would just like to make note of. I would just like to thank Representative Creasy. As you might have seen in the paper this weekend, the task force came to Little Falls, the Child Protection Task Force came to Little Falls, and that really was under the leadership of Representative Creasy to try to get them to outstate Minnesota and hear presentations from agencies and individuals serving those populations in rural Minnesota. So just to thank you again to Representative Creasy for doing that, so.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I
Yes,
wasn't able
Commissioner
to be
Chilsky.
at that in particular meeting. I was out of town at another, but that was a pretty well attended.
It was very well attended, yes. Yep. County Attorney Mittendorf was there, as well as I think Chief Deputy Worley was there because Larson was out of town, but yep. It was a pretty good representation, so.
Good.
Yep,
All right.
Time well spent.
yep. And it was an all day,
Morning.
so.
Morning, Katie.
So Katie and I are here requesting approval to sign the delegation agreement between South Country Health Alliance and Morrison County. The delegation agreement allows our agencies to provide case management and care coordination services on behalf of South Country. It also indicates in there the rates that they pay for certain services that we provide. I will make note that they've gone up a little bit. I didn't bring the old rate, but in 2014, they are going up a little bit.
Which is, Mr. Chair, a good thing for us.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
So they're paying us more to
Yeah.
do the
They're paying-
work we're
yep,
doing, is
yep,
what you're
yep.
saying?
They're paying us a little more to do the work. And just another thing that part of this delegation agreement requires us to be, have the proper individuals completing the work. And part of that is doing background checks through CMS. And so as a member.
CMS?
Thank you, Center for Medicaid Services.
Okay,
So that means people doing this work cannot have any criminal background history and you have to do it a certain way. So as a member of South Country, they are doing that on our behalf. So that's a huge benefit to us as well. So, our request is to approve the delegation agreement with South Country Health Alliance.
I would so move on that,
have a
Mr.
motion,
Chair.
do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and a second, further discussion.
Brad, my curiosity, my health insurance, for instance, runs about $1,500 a month. For county insurance, for things like this, is there a fee that we pay this organization per person that qualifies? Or is it just what they use? Or how do, I don't know.
Okay.
I guess I'm
Yep.
just curious about that.
So this South Country provides insurance to a certain population that is income eligible or as a result of their disability in Morrison County. So it's a specific population, it's not for businesses or organizations. So what ends up happening is the state pays them a per member rate depending on what program or what insurance they're under. So if they're under medical assistance, I can't speak to what the per member per month rate is, or if they're on special needs basic care or a MSHO, Minnesota Senior Health Option, there you go.
Thank you, Brad, thank you,
I
Brad.
had a brain lapse there, sorry Katie, so didn't mean to put you on the spot. Or MSC Plus, which is Minnesota Senior Care Complete. So this, actually South Country has a contract with the Minnesota Department of Human Services that pays them a per member rate for each person who is receiving that service. And then, so then we're providing some of those services on behalf of South Country as a member county. So for instance, they pay for almost one FTE of care coordinator that helps connect the clinic, our agency, public health, medical providers with their health insurance providers. So I know you had just a small snippet of South Country information last week, and there'll be a lot more to learn as you move forward. So, but really this has been a benefit to residents of Morrison County because it's allowed us to contract with providers. It's allowed us to have a say in how members are managed when it comes to their health care costs. So it really does provide that local level of health care for clients in Morrison County.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from members of the board? Do I have a motion?
I think we have.
We do, okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.
thanks, Brad.
I just have a couple little housekeeping
You're
things.
all alone this morning.
I'll move over.
You're on your own.
The first thing that you'll see, sorry, my voice is kind of going, but the first thing that you'll see is to approve the seasonal establishment owner license. the new establishment and the Country Inn and Suites just added some rooms on, so it's just an additional. You already approved the license for them, but just an additional. And the reason you see it twice in your packet is because I think we made a little clerical, said County Inn and Suites, so we wanted to
Okay.
correct that.
We did notice that we thought it was a different approval, so yes.
Yeah.
just
Okay.
one.
I would so move on that, Mr. Chair.
I have a second?
Mr. Chair, I would second that, but I have to have a clarification first.
Sure.
Is this motion including the 3 items?
It can be
three,
one, yes.
all three.
That's what
We do it
that's all I'm
together.
looking for.
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
I would second it.
Yep.
Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And then the other one is just to approve the tobacco license there's new ownership on the Looney Bend business, so it's just to approve the tobacco license for them as well.
We have a request on the floor? Do I have a motion?
So move.
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Sounds good. That's what I
Quite the
have
name
for
for
you.
an establishment.
Yeah, quick and painless. All right, have a good day.
Thank you very much.
In your younger days, you thought that was great.
Ms. Kowalczyk. Morning, Amy.
Good morning.
Good morning, Miss Amy.
Morning.
Amy.
I have a few things for you today. The first one, we did discuss at the last planning session regarding our last ordinance amendment. We added micro wind energy conversion systems and then also permitting for patios. And so with that comes an associated fee for permitting, and we had discussed the $75 permit fee for both. And so I am asking for approval to add that to our fee schedule.
So moved.
Request, motion on the floor?
I'll second it.
Okay. Further discussion?
Yeah, just to let you, we discussed this too, but you want to clarify patios?
Yes.
Question.
And where?
Yes, so we are permitting patios in shoreland only.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And that is in our ordinance, just because it
Yes.
doesn't say it here.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Chair, that was a very good
Commissioner Jelinski.
question, and thank you. Thank you very much.
Further
Patio,
discussion?
can't have a patio? No, it's a land use thing.
Having heard none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right. I'm going to ask Jeremy Barkowitz to come on up and join me.
Morning, Jeremy.
We wanted to, this has
Morning,
been
Jeremy.
a project that we've talked about for quite a long time, and it's finally wrapping up, and we're excited to share the results with you. I know this was emailed in your packet, but I do have some extras if you want a hard copy in front of you. But Jeremy was kind of headed up this project, so he's here to give you a face with this great project, and then also to answer any questions you may have. But this project was one that the board decided to treat as a pilot project. We had never done an inventory of septic systems around a lake or in any geographic area in the county before. So this was our first foray into this, and the board wanted us to treat this kind of as a pilot program just to see if the failure rate is significant enough to warrant rolling this out to other lakes and other areas of interest in the county. And so that was the approach that we took, and we wrapped up the inspections in November of 2014, and so we were able to kind of go through all of that information and put together some information regarding the number of systems that needed to be inspected, the failure rates, some observations, and all of that. And so I don't know if you've had a chance to take a look at the report, but I'll just highlight some and then certainly be happy to answer some questions. But one of the things that we found interesting was that 66% of the parcels on Fish Trap Lake have septic systems, which is a pretty big majority of that kind of tells you what the development around that lake is. And so I thought that was interesting that over half the parcels do have septic systems on them.
And what we qualify as septic systems are also like earthen privies, tanked privies, so it doesn't have to have a drain field to be considered a septic system,
Okay.
so.
Okay.
Because even the earthen privies are under the 70-80 Minnesota rule, and so we regulate those just like we do anything else that receives septic effluent. So that was the first thing that we did. It was kind of a laborious process going through each one of the parcels and identifying where we had septic systems. So it was a very comprehensive record review in our office to identify even the parcels that needed inspection. And so our easiest way, because of our 911 addressing system, any parcel that has a structure needs an address. And so that was a very, one of the most logical ways we could think of to identify those. So that was a very nice screening tool that we had to use. And so what we came up with is there are 322 septic systems around Fish Trap Lake. So that's a lot of systems, and 79% of them needed inspection. So,
Ms. Amy, Mr. Chair, Ms. Amy, can I ask a question?
absolutely.
We have 66%. What do the other 34% do?
They are
I-
parcels that don't have structures on them, that
Oh,
there's a lot of people
excellent.
that have, because there's a lot of lots that are quite small, so we might have multiple lots owned by the same person. They might have
Okay.
a structure
Very
on
good.
one, and then
Yep.
they might own a couple more.
Yep.
So on a parcel basis, they're owned and probably being utilized as a homestead, but just don't have a structure on them that would have a septic system serving them.
Very good, thank you
Commissioner
very
Wilson?
much.
Amy, I got a question too. Are these, is there a difference between seasonal versus year-round for these?
That's a good question. We didn't differentiate because the way our ordinance is set up and the way the code is if you have a dwelling, if you have a structure used for human habitation, it must have a septic system serving it. And so year-round use versus seasonal use, you must have something to serve it. So we didn't make that differentiation, and it's hard to do that. Other than whether we probably could take a look at how many of those are homesteaded or not. That would be a way to pull that out.
But
But
the-
we didn't run that.
But the numbers of parcels without systems means there's nothing on that parcel of land.
Either that, or there's an accessory structure that doesn't have a
Yeah,
plumbed water.
Because when I look at the graph, it looks a little deceiving. It looks like, 34% don't have things, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Exactly, that's,
And there's many ways to display this information,
that's
yes.
great.
And that leads me to the inspection results. There's 3 different ways you can look at the failure rate. One of the ways is of all of the systems that we inspected, which is just, a sampling of the systems, 25% of those failed. So that's a significant failure rate. But when you spread that over the total parcels on the lake, then that drops it down to a 14% failure rate of all the parcels around the lake.
And Amy, explaining that means that
Yeah.
the ones that have updated septics having to do with getting a permit and then getting them updated within the last so many years did not need to be inspected, correct?
Correct. We had, let's see, I have that number here. 68 systems didn't need inspection at all, and that either means they were new installs or they had a current certificate of compliance on file, and so they were out of the system. So, so we had a handful of those that didn't need. But then when you look at, of all the parcels that have structures on them or 911 addresses, that's a 20.5% failure rate. So, that's a significant rate. So it depends on how you, like Mr. Wilson pointed out, how you look at the numbers and how you want to present that. But, so that in itself, I thought this project was worthwhile, because now we've got a handle on every single system on Fish Trap Lake. And we know the compliance status of every single one. So, the other thing that I thought was interesting is, we have around our lakes, they were platted many, many years ago, and so we're dealing a lot of times, and you can tell in our variance history that we have a lot of small lots, and so you would assume that you might have a lot of holding tanks. And that wasn't actually the case, and that was an interesting bit of information for me, because 80% of the systems had a drain field. And so I thought that was interesting, and that's always the preferred method, and so that was an interesting illustration for me.
Do you have a lot of mound systems around the lakes, or is drain field and mound systems?
Well, the drain field, what we consider drain field, can be in-ground, which is your trenches, pressure beds. Your above ground would be your mounds, but they're all considered a drain field. The numbers, just by doing actual, new install inspections, to me, they're more or less pressure beds and grounds. You have some mounds, you have some trenches. It's just, I think around the lake's a little more sandier soil.
Yeah, up in that geographic area, we have sandier soils, which usually drives a pressure bed design. Not to say that we don't have some mounds, but the soil characteristics of that particular site will drive what kind of drain field is designed. But it is, a mound is an accepted drain field, just like anything else. It's above ground.
Mr. Chairman, or Jeremy, did you contact, like, the Fish Trap Lake, don't they have like a president of all that, giving this
There's a
information?
lake association, yes. This project came to fruition because the Lake Association approached the
And
county.
they have seen these numbers?
They will receive this after I've presented it to
And the
you
reason
today.
I'm seeing.
You get it first.
All right, well, nitrogen, because I know nitrogen was a problem in that area, and like say now, you see these numbers with a total system failure, 63 of them are not in compliance. Maybe I'm jumping ahead. What happens when you?
We will discuss that in just
Okay.
one
All right.
moment.
That's what I said, maybe I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah, the association came to us a few years ago
Right.
and wanted this
Yes,
done.
and really the driving force behind that was asking the county to amend the ordinance to allow the systematic inspection of systems. That was the first step into being able to do a program like this. Once the county adopted that language, then they were following up right away, okay, now we want to do this. Now that you have the legal ability to do it, now we want to move forward. And so then we partnered with the Soil and Water Conservation District on some grant funding to do this. And so they very much were a partner and very, very involved in this from the first step. So we inspected all these systems, and one of the other very interesting things was the vintage of the system correlated with the failure rate. So the older the system, the older the install, the higher the failure rate was. And we kind of expected that, but it was very interesting, and I think we had some people that were surprised that their system was failing because a lot of people don't have signs that their system is failing. When your system is not adequately treating the sewage that you're giving it, a lot of times you don't have any symptoms within the house. You don't have backup. You don't have surfacing. It's just that it's not being, as it moves through your system, it's not completely treated when it reaches the groundwater. And so that was an education piece
You
that
always heard a lot, my system's working,
Yeah.
but, you put the scientific behind it, then they don't.
Yeah.
So
And
how
that
do you
was-
test that? I mean,
Well, and
how
that's
do you
where
know
we
if
have-
nothing shows is my
Yes,
question.
so we have so that's where the inspection guidelines come in for the 70-80. So when we have an inspector go out there and they do the soil boring, they're looking for adequate separation from the bottom of the system to the nearest limiting layer, which is the first sign of water. So that's what they're looking for. So we had only one system was an imminent threat to public health, and that means surfacing. The rest of them were failure to protect groundwater. So that means the system, in the landowner's eyes, was functioning just fine. And so we did quite a bit of education with people. The phone calls we received were really more, I just want to be able to understand what this means. We didn't have people that were calling to argue over that they didn't believe it. They just wanted to understand it. And so it was a great educational opportunity for those people to understand what their system does, how it works. And so it was great to take that time with people. We also did attend the Lake Association meeting and had that conversation with them prior to their systems being inspected, as far as so they understand what we're going to be looking for, how the different ways a system can fail, what that will mean, and all of that. So I thought it was a great educational opportunity for people to understand the system that services their home. And so really where we're left now is now we have a whole bunch of systems that are going to be upgraded. So we are going to have what I would anticipate a very, very busy spring and summer with some of these systems. Because the inspections started in April and went through November, the ones that were just getting inspected in November, and because we had that early snow and all of that, those people didn't have a lot of time to react and get a new design into us and get their system upgraded. And so we fully expect that that's going to be happening now this spring. And so we've got, and actually Jeremy's going out to install on a system today. So we've got one more that had failed that is
If it
going
doesn't
to
get
be.
covered up by snow.
Commissioner
Yes.
Johnson? And any other questions at this time? Well, and my question would be, how much time do they have to bring their system into compliance?
So the good news is, only one of them was a imminent threat to public health. And that one is given 10 months to fix that issue. The rest of them have a year, have 12 months from the date we send their letter. So,
Nope, it's the date of compliance.
yeah,
inspection.
but we were sending the letter within like a week.
Yeah.
So we, so they get a year, and so that's gonna give them this whole next construction season to upgrade their system. And so we'll start seeing some designs coming in and upgrades coming in, but all in all, this project went very, very
And
well.
Mr. Chair, Amy, when they have to do even when they're just not in compliance, my guess, they're gonna have to have a new system put in, okay?
Well, and it depends on the failure. A lot of times, and I think Jeremy can speak to this, a lot of it were the drain field and maybe not the tank.
Okay.
So they may only have a partial upgrade.
The tank just needs to be watertight, basically.
In these inspections, they can tell whether it's the tank is leaking or
Yes.
if the.
Yes, they'll check the soundness, so they check every component of the system. So they'll check for soundness and water tightness of the tank, and then they also check the adequate separation of the drain field.
How do they check the soundness of the tank?
Sometimes, it depends on the inspector, sometimes they got a camera they'll put down and see if there's any cracks in the tank. Other times, they will go dig down on the outside of the tank, see if there's any black residue, which would indicate, if
Leaking.
there's leaking. Sometimes they'll have the customer just leave, not pump the tank, so they can see what the actual level is. If you got too much liquid in,
Yeah.
that means groundwater is going into the tank. If it's constantly low, that means it's going out of the tank.
And they'll
So-
physically probe the bottom of the tank too,
Yeah,
to
to see
make
if
sure
there's
that
a
it's
bottom.
sound. But we had a fair amount of cesspools. We had a fair amount of the really old systems where it was really just the pipe and then a container that had rusted. And so a lot of those are going to be, redone and upgraded.
And looking at that generation, I remember putting in our
Yeah.
septic over by the golf course when we were kids, and you put the block holding tank and then you threw whatever the heck else you had in for the drain field. There was no science to it back then, so I'm sure a lot of these systems are the remainder of that theory or thought
Absolutely.
process. Yes.
And them were a lot of the pre-96 systems that there wasn't code involved with.
Exactly,
So-
exactly.
So there was no standard to build them to.
No, you just did. Commissioner Jelinski?
Mr. Chair, Amy, Jeremy, I'm just curious, how well received were you? You came, I'm just making this up, you came to my place and I've got a failure and you're telling me, you've got a failure, I said, no, my toilet flushes fine.
Yes.
I don't have a failure. Yes, you do. How well received is this? Because now obviously, you're not gonna replace it, I'm gonna replace it, which I've got, but I'm just questioning.
We did a lot of legwork on the front end for that. The Lake Association was very instrumental in that. They started disseminating information that this is coming. We've applied for this grant. If we get it, this is what it means. Way before the grant was even received. Then when the grant was received, then they were, okay, the grant's been received. This is what it means. After, we tried to be as transparent as we possibly could and keep people informed all along the way. So it was no surprise when the inspector showed up. It was no surprise when they got a letter from us. But some of the things that we did for outreach is obviously worked with the Lake Association and helped them with the message that they were giving in their newsletters and their meetings. Once we received the grant and we evaluated all of the properties, then each property owner that was selected for or their lot qualified for an inspection, they were given a letter from us saying, okay, this is, you've been selected, you are going to be inspected, this is what that means. If you have any other information on your system, please provide it to us. We had an 80% return rate on
I
that
thought
letter.
that was really
Wow,
good.
good.
Because
Which was amazing.
it just, to me, we made this sheet, basically, it's like a little as-built.
Yep.
If you know where your system is, draw it out. To me, it got them involved a little bit, maybe thinking a little bit, hey, maybe we should take a little closer look at this. Otherwise, a lot of times, you don't see these septic systems.
And we had a fair amount of parcels where we had no information on their system. So it was anybody's guess where it was. And so we had a great return rate. And then when we attended the annual Lake Association meeting, that was very well attended. And I believe Commissioner Orr was there. And we fielded quite a few questions and went through, what are we going to be looking for? What will this mean? We had a lot of people afterwards then follow up and call and ask questions. And then either way, after they were inspected, they received correspondence from us. This was the outcome of your inspection. So even if they had a passing system and we sent them a copy of that, letting them know, okay, here it is for your records. This is what this means for you. And so those people now have a current certificate of compliance on file. So if they do anything that triggers a need for an inspection, they're going to be valid for 3 years and won't need to.
Yeah, the
Commissioner
Lake
Wilson?
Association was the leader there.
Oh, absolutely.
Got everybody on board.
Commissioner Wilson?
Mr. Chair, Amy, you said that you sent out, like you picked people and sent out things, but everybody.
didn't
but
pick
everybody
people.
was done, right?
I'm sorry? No.
Everybody was done.
No. So what we did is we evaluated each one, because if we had a brand-new system installed, or if we had a system that had inspection within the last 3 years, there was no need to inspect their system.
But that's in this data.
Yes. And so 68 systems were not requiring inspection. Yes. Yep, so but everybody else, anybody that we were going to be inspecting, they were given notice that they were going to be inspected.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Commissioner Johnson?
Yes, for Commissioner Wilson's, when somebody would come in, a lot of these hadn't pulled building permits for years, I'm sure. So that's why,
Yeah.
so,
The
but if
triggers-
somebody had a building permit recently and it had a,
The triggers for inspection in shoreland is either property transfer, and that wasn't happening a lot on Fish Trap Lake because these have stayed in the family and they haven't necessarily triggered the property transfer qualifications, so we weren't catching some of them that way. And then, no building activity
Yeah.
on some of these. And so, aside from that, there were things that we had no permit activity, no septic information at all, so now we've at least got that baseline information for all of these systems.
And members of the board, I'd be willing to bet that more people are gonna come in for permits to build now. I think on a septic that needs to be upgraded at a substantial
A lot of
cost
times they kinda
would prevent people from wanting to or making
Absolutely.
additions. Very, very much so.
Because that is, if they kind of have an inkling knowing that their septic's that old,
Yep.
they know it's really not gonna pass, well, now, that's another, could be a $10,000 addition.
Sure,
onto, you know,
sure. The really neat thing about this, from my perspective, is we have property owners who really care about their lake and the environment. This really shows that. I mean, that's so important. I mean, they really care about the lake they live on.
starting right
So-
with the Lake Association.
That's right, that's right.
We were very pleased with how well it was received. We fully expected to have at least a handful of property owners that would not allow inspection or would resist, and we didn't have any. And so it was very.
Yeah.
And kind of
Deb?
before this,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
before this pilot started, we had a meeting up, with multiple counties up in Brainerd, which we have every year. And I brought this project up, and a lot of the counties just based that, well, that ain't gonna work, because people aren't gonna like you going on
It was
the
like a
property.
good luck with that.
Yeah, and all in turn, it was just the
Yeah.
opposite. So a lot of people wanted to be around during the inspection, so they could talk to the inspector and stuff, so.
Mr. Chair, that is commendable, because I don't think this project would have gone as well had we not had staff like Jeremy and leading the project, so thank you. Job well done, because I don't think anybody expected the success that we had, and Amy Amy working with him on that and the cooperation with all the property owners and Lake Association. You're right, it was a tremendous project, so well done.
Commissioner
Mr.
Winter?
Chair, no, I know that this was a grant base. Is there any money available now through this grant or through anything now for these people that need a new septic system?
Couple of things. So we do have a low-interest loan program. It's through the Ag BMP loan program. So it's a low-interest loan program that can be for anyone who wants to apply. They just need to be creditworthy, obviously, to get the loan. So we do have that. We have communicated that to everyone. So part of our mailing that goes to these people that are in an upgrade situation, they are informed of that program. We also have grant funds available for people that meet certain income thresholds, and we also inform property owners of that. And so we do make them aware that there are a couple of programs that can help somebody out if they aren't expecting this upgrade and haven't budgeted for it, then they can certainly take advantage of either one of those programs. So.
Commissioner Wilson?
Mr. Chair, I just think you did such a good job on this here, but, you know, a lot of your prep work, a lot of the work that you do talking to people ahead of time, before you come to the, you know, when you explain to people, if we do find a problem, we have programs in place to help you fix this, you're not so intimidating then, because when people come on your property and they want to do something, and it's like, you're gonna do this, that just gets them on the wrong side of things, but, I really like this. The only thing that I would question, if you did it again, I wonder if I would use the partials of land that don't have nothing on it. You know what I
As
mean?
far as in the data?
In the data, just because it makes it look like there's so many places that are non-conforming, but they're non-conforming because they don't need to be. Yeah.
No, that makes
But
sense.
otherwise, this is really good. I like this. And you know, in town, we pay $40-50 a month for our sewer system. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the difference between
Yeah.
septic systems. People in town think,
Yeah.
well, I'd rather have a septic system. These systems here, when something happens, it costs you $5,000-10,000 to
Yeah.
fix them. So,
Commissioner Johnson? you-
I know when Lake Association came to us with that several years ago, we didn't know how, we
Right.
didn't know how to take that at first.
Right.
And they did, like I say, they did a good job of getting people on board.
Absolutely. That was critical, to have a very supportive Lake Association that helped with the information and all of that. So that was invaluable. And so that would be something that the board, you know, these legacy, the Clean Water Legacy funds are available, and the Soil and Water Conservation District does apply for Clean Water Legacy funds every year. And so if this is something that you'd like to roll out to other lake associations, we would start that outreach. And I think one of the things is we want a willing lake association. And that would certainly be something we would pursue if that's the direction you'd like to go.
Commissioner Jelinski?
Mr. Chair, Amy, has there been any other lake associations that have approached you?
We had a couple lake associations that had heard what we were doing with Fish Trap and were interested. And we even considered, because we weren't exactly sure how the inspection contract was gonna come in for price.
Yep.
And all of that, we weren't sure if we were gonna have some extra funds, and so we had kind of preliminary reached out to a couple of smaller lakes to see, if we have extra funds, do you want to do this? And they did express some interest. We also do have some areas of the county that may need to be looked at, or you may wish to look at for other reasons, like high nitrates. You know, the ordinance provisions allows for inspection whenever we do not have adequate information. It doesn't have to be around a lake.
Yep.
So this could be in any wellhead protection area, or a DWISMA, or a
A duisma?
what's a TWISMA?
We're gonna find out.
and I'm gonna probably have to have Darren do that. Drinking water supply management area. There we go. But those are getting to be, those are getting to be more critical areas, and the Department of Health is requiring municipalities to evaluate those areas a little bit more. And then we have like those high nitrate areas in our county that could be looked at on a township by township basis. So the applicability of this is quite a lot, and all of that would qualify for legacy funding. So there's lots of different ways we could take this program in the future. So.
Well
Very good, yes, yes.
Yep.
Thanks, Jim.
Very
Good.
thank you.
The
Yep,
other thing
thank
quick I
you.
want to mention, the fellow who did the
Yes.
the inspections lives right up by the lakes.
Yes.
And there's a local connection as well. I think that's also so important, that
Yeah,
networking.
that did help a lot, because a lot of people that had, that called me.
Sure.
And I mentioned the inspector's name. Oh,
They
I know
knew
him,
that they know
or I
him,
knew
so
him,
that's,
or-
that's so
Yep.
important, so.
You know, and I
Yes.
had some discussion with him afterwards, and he even said what a positive experience it was for him. He said he would do another one of these projects. He would very willingly do
Yeah,
another
Mr. Chair, I'd
project.
be all
so.
for it to look at the other
To look
lakes.
at
These
some
other
of those.
lakes, all
Yeah,
without
I
a
would,
doubt,
yeah.
yes.
Just-
And I think we have a responsibility. I mean, if you look at that kind of failure rate, okay, boy, that means, really, what do we need to do to ensure that we have good, safe water?
Well, and too, Mr. Chair, that's where they started. They started with the Lake Association. You get
Yeah.
out there and say, hey, would you be interested in this? And see what kind of feedback.
And what I think helped a lot in this experience, it wasn't just a small lake we started with, it
Yeah.
was one of the
Good
bigger
size,
lakes.
yes,
Yep.
yes.
So now we got like 2, 3 more big lakes in the county, and the rest are the
Yeah.
littler ones, which, should,
And we, this marries well with the water plan
Yes, it
also.
does.
So it's a great partnership between our
good
office
information.
and the Soil and Water
Yeah.
Conservation District too,
Yes.
so.
Yes, good,
Thank you.
good
All
job.
right.
Very
Thank
good
you.
job,
Now you
thank you,
have some
sir.
real
Okay.
data to show
Amy, you
the
have
other
some more
places.
stuff? for
Yeah,
us?
now I'm gonna have Darren come up.
Morning, Darren.
Morning, Darren.
Now we're gonna switch and we're gonna talk about feedlots.
There you go.
I'm gonna pass this around. You had this in your packet, but in case you want a hard copy of that. So this is the time of year we come to you every year to present the annual report and performance credit report for feedlots. So this is the activity that happened in 2014. We are kind of in the cusp of the MPCA between 2013 and 14 changed how they award performance credits. And so between this year, or 2014 and 2013, it's not a complete apples-to-apples comparison as far as the weighting of the points. But I'm just gonna turn it over to Darren, and he can kind of recap 2014 and where
Sure.
we're at.
So I'll start with a little map. This is the inspections. There was 56 of them that happened last year. And each little triangle there represents kind of a feedlot that was inspected. So you can kind of get an idea based on each kind of township. I see the copier didn't get them great, but you can kind of see most of, or a lot of the inspections, Agram Township, all feedlots that were in Agram were inspected. So every single one of them in that township. But you can see kind of some of the western, or eastern, part of the county is where most of them happened.
So Darren, can you talk about in 2014 what the inspection priority was?
Sure. So we had a few things. One is I wanted to get to to feedlots that have never been inspected before, ever. So I did 20 inspections out of my 56 were sites that have never had a full compliance inspection. We've been there before doing our inventory, but not necessarily a full compliance inspection. So then the other portion of it was going to those high nitrate townships. So Cauldron, Agram, Belle Prairie, Boo, Bellevue, and Swan River, I believe, were the townships that the Department of Ag had identified for the nitrate in the water. So those were then in turn incorporated into my work plan so that I tried to get to those townships. That's why Agram, specifically, I went to those to try to get there.
Yes,
Mr. Chair, Darren, it wasn't just because Agram is the best place to live.
No, it is not. It was not.
I'm sure that was it.
And
They
there's-
want to protect your water.
I was maybe
We've got your back.
misunderstood.
Yep.
Yeah, they want to protect your water, Jen. That's
Yes.
important.
Yep. Relatively smaller amount of feedlots in Agram as well in terms of compared to, Boo or Granite or Piers or Buckman, so I said I got to all of them, but, I think there's 10 to 15 somewhere in there, I don't know exactly, but, so that's the other reason. So that kind of shows where I was. The annual report here, the spreadsheet with the numbers, gives you more of, this is what the state requires us to report every year. A lot of stuff on here is just documenting numbers. You'll see the number 618 in bold there on top. That is the amount of registered feedlots in Morrison County as of the new registration period. So those are there are 10 animal units or more in shoreland, and then 50 animal units or more outside of shoreland. So to put that in perspective, you have to have at least like 50 beef steers in order to be considered a feedlot. So if you have 49 beef steers, you are not a registered feedlot. So,
And we're required to inspect 10%.
well, 7% is what the state requires us to inspect. So if you do the math on that, that's around 43, 44 feedlots. So that's why I did 56 this year. So it was around 9.8 is what I did this year.
Mr. Chair, Darren,
Yes,
they're
Commissioner
not
Wilson.
telling you which ones to inspect, how big to inspect. I mean, they could all be 50 steers.
Yep.
They could be.
But he is required to submit a work plan every year, and he has to set goals and kind
Oh,
of why.
gotcha. Yep.
So
Very good.
so they do kind of ask you to shake out what your rationale is for
Okay,
the year, as far
Very
as
good.
where you're gonna go and why.
Okay,
Mr.
gotcha.
Chair and Darren, could you explain for people that don't know what an animal unit is? I know like a cow is more than one animal unit and so forth,
Yep.
just so people kind of understand what we're talking about when we're talking about animal units.
Sure. So the state has numbers that we use, and it's based on 1,000 pounds. So a mature cow, like a dairy cow, would be 1.4 based on 1,400 pounds. When it comes to a chicken, we'll use 0.005 based on like a 5-pound average. Or a swine, usually they'll use 0.3 for 300 pounds or under. So depending upon the type of animal and all that, they'll figure out what type of animal unit they use. You'll see the breakdown as far as where I went, like 7, 8, and for sites between 50 and 299, 35 of them, and then 25 that were over 300. In Morrison County, we have a significant amount of feedlots that are between 50 and 299 compared to over 300, so that number's usually larger just because that's the type of feedlots we have. Let's see, what else should I highlight? Construction inspections, usually if someone is proposing any sort of construction, we're going out on site and we're doing an inspection. So if you want to add on, a heifer shed to your dairy facility, or if it's just a whole new freestall barn and you're adding on even more animal units, we're inspecting the site to make sure that the whole farm is in compliance before the expansion happens. So that's another trigger that, will necessarily always be inspected even if they're not in the work plan area.
If I may, Mr. Chair, maybe to piggyback on Mr. Wilson's, these performance credit, that would be the one I'd like to understand. Why they get these PC
Sure.
credits and that sort.
So you'll see there's a lot of work that we do, like the number inspections, the level ones and all that, where there's no credit you'll see given for it, because that's considered part of your daily duties, essentially. That's why we get the delegation agreement. There are some things, though, that we do that they are willing to give more credit for. So you'll see, like construction inspections, they'll give a certain credit point to it. You'll see.
What's the advantage of getting this performance credit?
At the end of the day, these credits are tied to more dollars given to the county in terms of grants.
So we get a base feedlot, just because we're a delegated county, we get a base amount of funding. The performance credit then is another pot of money that gets distributed amongst the counties that qualify for the performance credits, and it's an additional payment that is made based on kind of what you've done above and beyond that.
Incentive-based, yeah.
Exactly, yes. And one of the things I want to point out is, last year, the MPCA reevaluated what they were assigning performance credits for, how many performance credits they were giving for various activities. And we always have come in with more inspections than what is required. But one of the other things is we get a lot of fixes done. One of the things is because he stays on them and, and he's their best friend until they get it done. The other thing is because, he would be otherwise, yes. He's just a friendly neighborhood feedlot person. The other thing is because if someone is proposing inspection or expansion, because we do that full inspection, we have that extra leverage when you are giving CUPs, because then we make that part of their conditions. And that really helps get these fixes done. And the MPCA has weighted that a lot more. So when you accomplish a fix, they give a lot more points now for that. And we had 10 fixes?
Yeah.
10 fixes this year. And so that's a lot of points. So we're coming out points-wise a lot higher because they've decided to put more weight on that. So
Who would that be, we would thank for? Is he
that
sitting
guy right there.
Yeah, so yeah, we did
Best
do,
friend.
yeah, exactly. That's what, so yeah, we did do 10 of them this year. You'll see, I mean, we found, or I found 11 more when I was out there. So but there's continually work to be done. Some of these have been, you know, known for quite a few years. Some of these happened, the fix was found in January and done by, you know, March or sometimes the end of the summer. So sometimes they happen within a year, sometimes it takes 2, 3, 4 years to get them done. But usually they're on the list, so we'll you know, continually get out there.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Johnski.
Darren, I would be curious as to know, was there anything that really stuck out throughout the course of the year? You went to Joe's Feedlot, doesn't make any difference. I mean, did something stick out that was, oh my word? More than anyone else?
Not really. There's so many different, you know, reasons someone could be in non-compliance, you know, compared, you know, if you're going to a poultry site, to a dairy site, a beef site, there's so many different things.
Okay.
So, you know, I would say out of all of them that are most involved, it's the dairy sites, because you have so many different things going on that potentially, the checklist gets much larger, you know, versus a poultry
A
site.
total
or-
confinement
yeah,
facility.
or a swine facility. So, yeah, I don't know, they're all, so they're all unique in their own right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fair
so,
enough.
yeah.
Fair
I don't know if, they all kind of stick out as far as, you know, if there's issues to be worked on, as far as then it's a matter of, now how are we going to fix it? And that becomes a very back and forth, or, you know, do you have family taking over? Do you want to do a big fix? Do you want to do a little fix, a cheap fix, an expensive one? So those can sometimes become, you know, very
Good enough.
time-consuming.
Thank you.
Deb?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to, you know, we had a couple of examples here of successful things. I mean, Darren every year submits this report. I think 10 fixes is huge, working with property owners, not having significant issues that either come to you or come to me is a big deal. Jeremy working on the septic system, I so eloquently put it the other day when I was in planning and zoning. I'm like, Amy, the awesomeness per square footage in your office is incredible. So they're doing a good job down there, and I just wanted to let you know, because that isn't always a very well-received function of county government. So the more we can work with property owners, whether it be feedlot or septic systems out on a lake, is a big deal. So thank you.
And members of the board, I think the reception I get as a county commissioner when I come in to deal with issues that constituents call me about is just so wonderful. And that working relationship is so important. It just is. So I know I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
I do too. I just think it's so great when you ask people to help you, then tell them what to do. The response is just totally different. You know, when you ask them, when you tell them we got a problem and we need to try to fix it, they're more than willing to help you if you ask properly.
Yep.
When you come in and act like a sergeant, you're gonna do this, and that's the way it is, then they start fighting back a little bit.
Resistance breeds resistance.
I've always said Amy's got the toughest job in the courthouse, to tell people what they can do with their land and what they can't do.
Well, I give the
That's a
really
tough
sticky
job.
ones to him.
After the fact.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he gets to deal with those.
Anything else, gentlemen?
Darren, I do have one other question.
Yes.
Back to that animal unit.
Yeah.
Is that 1,000 pounds considered mature? In other words, you know, a baby calf
Yeah.
is,
Yep.
well, you do explain.
So, it kind of depends. Again, I'll say, when it comes to dairies, it's treated a little, sometimes, or beef particularly, sometimes can get a little confusing for people versus swine or poultry. Swine and poultry, we're always permitting the end result. So like a chicken, we're gonna say 0.05, saying the bird's gonna be over 5 pounds. Swine, if you're raising a 275-pound swine, at the end of the day, that will permit as 0.3. With dairies, though, you're going to have that kind of turnaround. You know, like the calf's going to come in, and the calf's going to turn into a heifer. The heifer will be a 0.7 versus a 0.2 as a calf. And then that turns into a mature cow, which is 1.4.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to, yeah.
You need this gentleman to help you out.
So, yeah, the numbers can sometimes, you know, one day, you know, and that's always a tough thing to explain, is one day you may have more cows and less cows, and next day you don't. So we're always trying to find,
One
you
day you're in
know,
compliance, the next day you're
yeah, a
not.
number that works.
So usually when we are taking people through the registration process, because they register every 5 years, right?
Yep.
We're gonna say, during those 5 years, what's the most cows you've had? What's the most cow-calf pairs you've had? What's the most, you know, and that's how we handle the registration and the animal units for
But on the other
those.
side of that story, when you're talking poultry, and you're talking 5 pounds, the odds of them being 5 pounds on the farm
very
are
short.
probably a week. So, you know, you're taking the max, and all this time that comes up, they're not max. Just so people understand that a little bit, that they're not there at that full weight very long.
And to add more to that, a little bit of that is the confusion, I guess. You know, when we're doing manure management as well, then we do take into consideration when they're smaller,
Right.
they only generate this amount of manure, but when they're larger. So that's taken consideration versus always permitting for the maximum.
Okay, thank you.
Good stuff. Anything else, Board?
Mr. Chair, if we could
Yes.
approve that feedlot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, do we need
I
to sign?
would
so
motion.
move.
So
Minor
motion,
bill.
do I have a second?
Second.
Motion second. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion's approved, carried.
Mr. Chair, if I could go back, I was possibly dozing off before, but that permit fee that we approved, if you could recall, or re-ask that question, it's a roll call vote, if you wouldn't mind. There was a motion and a second to approve the $75 permit fee, but I need that roll call.
Okay.
So if we could readjust that, I
Need a
apologize.
roll call and a second? Commissioner Jelinski,
Aye.
Commissioner Johnson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wilson,
Aye.
Commissioner Wincher.
I just can't believe you missed that.
But I, yes,
Thank you, Commissioner Winters.
Aye.
All right, we'll reflect that in the records.
With
And
that
my
being said, I would
apologies.
like to.
Good catch.
Very good. With that being said, I would like to recess the board for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
That's the best.